Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome back to the Housing Sector Podcast. I am again joined by my friend Hannah Howard-Jones. Ooh, ooh, ooh. You must get that all the time. I'm sorry. I've lowered the tone instantly by doing that one. And I reached out to Hannah a couple of weeks ago because, again, there's lots going on with my own landlord regulator of social housing. And I started to think, what are the board doing? Where's the oversight? Where's the governance? Who's saying enough's enough? Who calls the shots? Does the CEO have all the power? Where does it lie? And I think one of the first questions, Hannah, thank you again for joining me today on the Housing Sector Podcast. The first question is perhaps, what is the purpose of the board? And we're talking in housing associations, because there are other boards doing other things, but bringing it into our own sector, for a housing association, what is the purpose and goals of the board?
Well, firstly, thanks, Ben, for having me back on and inviting me to speak and share my views. So what is the role of the board? So the board are there to really govern and make sure that the housing association is fulfilling its purpose. So the articles of association will set out the purpose, and the purpose will be to provide affordable housing for those in housing need, or, to support local authorities deliver their statutory requirements. So the board is there to ensure that the housing association's delivering their purpose. They will set the strategy. They will set the tone for how the vision, the values in which they want the organisation to behave. So we've got quite a big role in that regard, because they have to set that up, but they also have the job of governing it and making sure that that's delivered in a way that is compliant, regulatory, statutory compliance, in a way that builds trust, doesn't damage the reputation, and in a way that is financially viable. So the money that the housing association receives in rents, in grants, is spent in the best way and delivers value for money. So it's quite a wide-ranging role. They can't obviously be involved in the operational delivery. They rely on the executive to deliver their vision, deliver the purpose. And then it's the executive's role, but the chief executive manages the executives then manage the directors of their functions, and the directors oversee the heads of that then lead the teams to deliver that vision. So in an ideal world, that should all be kind of structured in a way that everything trickles down and you can concertina it up and down and everything aligns, so you can see that people on the ground are delivering what the board at the top requested.
Okay, and say the board discover that things, are they? I often think that there's this layer of bullshit. Let's call it what it is. We're doing this, and this is what we they try and force feed to the residents. We're doing this. We've successfully done this. We've achieved this. We've achieved that. When the lived-in proof is that we're in homes that aren't safe, affordable, and warm, dry. So, at what point do the board go, "Hang on a minute. The information that's being shared with us might not be, perhaps we don't need the silver coating on it. Could you just give us the raw facts?" And at that point, when they identify a problem, what power do they have to intervene?
Well, the boards should be, so they shouldn't just be taking the information presented to them at face value. If a board report is saying everything's great, don't look here, that in itself should raise alarm bells. I'm not saying just because people are getting things right is, you should be cynical, but if everything is a good news story, then that should raise alarm bells. I guess, I've sat in many different boards across different sectors, and you always hear, well, it's not for us to get involved in the operational detail. But funny enough, I sat in a recent webinar, and actually the message was boards need to get under the bonnet a bit more. And I agree. I think if you don't understand the operation that you're governing, how can you test and challenge, and how can you um, see when things are perhaps, or if you don't understand it, how can you be assured? Because that's ultimately what you're looking for. Um, and I've worked with boards, where we had a big problem with arrears, and the board paper set out, high level what we were doing. Because again, the 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 key message that we were given as directors was, don't give too much operational detail. It's quite difficult to explain what you're doing without giving that operational detail. So we gave high level and actually invited the board member who had the background in housing management to come in and actually sit with the team. And that was a really good exercise because it built trust between us as the leadership in the business and the board. So I would encourage boards to do more of that, to understand where that information's coming from, so they can be assured.
When they know that something's going wrong, can they go in and say, "Look, your director of repairs isn't doing the job. We need them out." Do they have that sort of power?
I guess it's they should flag, and I mean they appoint the chief executive, and ultimately it's on the chief executive. If the chief executive isn't managing their direct reports, then that's on them. So yes, the board do have the ability to hire and fire the chief executive. I don't believe they can make those decisions with regards to their non-direct reports, because but don't test me on that. They can obviously give their impression of this isn't right, but why haven't you flagged it? Because that's your job. Um, so ultimately, yes, I guess if you had a change of chief executive, that would signal that the board had lost trust. If it wasn't for a reason, retirement or moving on to another role. Um, so yeah, I think just like me, I'm accountable for my team. If my team are failing, then that's on me, ultimately. And if I'm not managing that, if I'm not, highlighting performance issues or not supporting my team to develop so they have the right competence to do their job. Equally, if I miss something, if I don't report something, um, that's on me. It's for me to make sure that I'm assured that the information I'm receiving to make the decisions that are within my remit are correct. And equally that goes hand in hand with, if it's not correct and it's information I receive from another area of the business, it's incumbent upon me, especially as a chartered surveyor, as a professional who prescribes a whole list of other requirements, that I flag that. And so there should be mechanisms in place to support people to do that. But we know, you know, culture can be a barrier to that. And if people don't feel safe and to flag or to speak up, that can that can impede those mechanisms from triggering in the right way.
I'm going to come back to some of the governance part in a minute, particularly around sort of data controls, AI, and risk and whatnot. But if we've got, to put this in context, years ago, when I was working within the care sector, we had care home managers, and the only way you can describe them is they've worked their way to that position and they've gotten there, and they were as hard to find as ants' teeth. They got in that position. Do we have a problem with not a problem. Do we have something to overcome where we've got CEOs and perhaps we haven't got CEOs to replace? Are there lots of people ready to become CEOs? Or are these guys so hard to find that we keep them in the place? And I talk obviously because the CEO of my own landlord, Ruth Cook, has headlined countless failures and is now currently being reinvestigated by the regulator of social housing. And yet she seems to walk on water. There is absolutely no comeuppance from the board. But you've alluded to the fact that actually the CEO is where the buck stops and that perhaps they have the position to remove her. But for reasons beyond my understanding, haven't.
Yeah, and I can't comment on
No.
why. your landlord's board haven't addressed that. I think if you look to the private sector, if you look at the tenure of a CEO, it's a lot shorter than the tenure of a CEO in a
Yeah.
housing association or a, and I guess there are reasons for that. Uh, but I do it does, if you've had somebody presiding over a business for a very long time, and you're right, if the performance indicators are highlighting that there are errors, then the question has to be asked, do we need to change here? Why do we keep continuing with this and still getting the same result? Um, in the private sector, particularly in public listed companies, the shareholders would vote them out. If they weren't getting their returns, it's as black and white as that. You haven't performed, off you go, bring somebody else in. Um, and and that drives performance. It can drive some bad behaviors as well. But there is a slightly more ruthless approach to that failure at the top. And I I think with public with sorry with the public sector and with charitable organizations, you do want some consistency. You do want, because people go into those sectors for different reasons. You want to keep knowledge in the business. You don't want to have uncertainty, um, and perhaps the pace at which these organizations can change. But to your point about, we can't keep rewarding failure, and we can't keep accepting um, below average. So there does need to be a rethink, I think. Are there is there a leadership shortage? Um, well, there was a report just brought out, I think, on Friday by one of the recruitment firms that talked about, are there skills gaps? And I think that they cited that the current leadership teams are very good at reacting. They're very good at,
Mm.
oh God, something's happened. Right, let's jump on it. And I would say yes, in my experience, that is the case. Um, and there is a lack of experience about how to innovate, how to do things differently, because I think that's where we're getting to in the sector. Is we keep doing the same things. We're structured in the same ways. We keep saying the same things and hoping for a different result, but fundamentally it needs to be flipped. There needs to be efficiencies brought in. How are we going to achieve them? If you can't innovate, if you can't change the way you've done things, if you don't know a different way of procuring your repairs and maintenance service without just going down a DLO route, um,
DLO, sorry.
direct labour organised in-house contracting function, um, which comes with huge risk. It's a bit like setting your own development company. There are house builders out there that have been putting years and years of research and development into refining their processes, and understand the risks and are ready. So housing associations have become, they've tried to do a lot when actually their core focus, they're not even doing that brilliantly. So it's, why are we trying to diversify when actually we just need to stick to the.
It's a constant gripe of mine. Oh, we're going to tackle domestic abuse and knife crime. I think you can't provide a house that doesn't leak. Why are you
Yeah.
getting involved in that? Okay, so let's look forward to a new tomorrow where housing associations are going to go, right, we need to rethink how we do this, because we can't have people like Mr. Jenkins harking on about how bad we're doing all the time. And one of those things has got to be, obviously, the implementation of AI. I mean, everyone's talking about it's going to come in, it's going to happen. And with that, as I say at the minute, every time they bring in a new merger or a new CRM system, the problem is they're pulling bad data that it's already muddled, and then there's no clear route into it. So as a board and as the sort of head of a board, planning for tomorrow, what do we need to be mindful of? What do they need to be ensuring that they're doing to ensure that the correct data controls are in, that the AI is able to do that whilst limiting the risk to the end user, which is us? And of course, our data is so valuable because it isn't just where I shop and what shirts I like to buy, it's where I live, how much I pay, yiddle and
Yeah.
yaddle. So where do we go there, Hannah?
So this is a passion of mine. I have talked about data for, well, far too long, and I never could quite articulate what I meant so I've been involved in lots of systems transformation, implementation projects, and the one thing that I've always been nervous about is the data. So when you take data from one system and put it onto your new system, it's all bells and whistles. How do you make sure that data during that transfer process is kept correct? And I talk, I've come from managing agent background, so it was always service charge data, which would fill me with horror because that's client money. That's my client's money that we're potentially going to put um, into a different system, and we might lose its integrity. Um, so you have to be really careful. But there are things you can do. So I now work for DataClan, which is a very specialist data consultancy, and we advise gosh, this sounds like a shameless plug, but we advise not just housing associations, real estate property owners, occupiers, and other sectors on their data needs to ensure that that data is kept um, accurate and has its integrity. You can trace its lineage. Basically, all the things you've just described, we put those foundations in place, or help organisations to. So, what can boards do? I think they they need to start asking the questions around the data. How do I know? So when you're presented with your KPI performance reports, how do I know that that number you're telling me about stock condition surveys completed as a percentage of your portfolio, how do I know that's correct? And if the person presenting the paper can't answer that, um, by explaining that it's correct because you do sample checks, because you have assurance around the date and the way that date is held in the system, that nobody can overwrite it. You should then start seeking that assurance, because that really underlines the decisions you then make about when you repair the roof, when you replace the boiler, where you might have risks of components failing. Um, so that's just one example. I've lost my train of thought.
That's okay. So, but as a board, I have to trust what I'm being told again. So we're all about sample sets there. But if I can't be sure that I'm trusting it, how far can I interrogate it? And what sort of trouble would I be in? Would I be seen as an unfavourable board member if I started shouting, "I don't trust that. I want to see the evidence"?
I I think, well, would you possibly, but it's a valid question. How can that ultimately, that's what we're asking. I ask it from my team, how can I trust this data? How do we know this is right? Um, I suspect you start asking those questions, a lot of organizations will say, actually, we don't know, or we know there's limitations here. And it's about having a long-term plan to put in. That you will always have tactical measures. You will always have, right, okay, there's a leak, not physically in the property, there's a hole in the bucket here, so we've got to plug that, put that on a stronger footing. But what's the longer term? What's the plan? Because AI, you're right, you mentioned AI. AI is rapidly accelerating how we work, changes to how we work, how we use information. And it can look very convincing. We've all done it, chucked something into Chat GPT and it comes back. You're like, oh, wow, and it does it in 30
Yeah.
seconds.
And it does sound convincing. You do have to look
It,
under the bonnet a little bit, don't you?
absolutely. And I think the question boards should be asking is, how do we know the AI is correct? How do we know that this, and there are ways you can do that by giving, if you have your data, if you understand how to calculate, for instance, um, if you understand all your safety measures on a building, so how do I know this building is safe? If you want your AI to tell you that answer that question, you've got to then tell the AI what the metrics are, and you would go to your building safety team, for instance, and say, right, how do you know that this? Because they're the experts, and they would work ideally with the tech people to then make sure that that's programming of the AI, coding of the AI follows that logic. And if you do that, you have assurance, because you can say, well, we know the AI is correct because it's taking this data here, this data here. Then the next question is, well, how do we know that data is correct? We know it's correct because, and you do have to use sample testing. You do have to, but if you are robustly scrutinizing and checking your processes for collecting the data, you've got assurance about the people's competence that are collecting the data, the sources of information. You can build quite a strong narrative that, is arguably the best you can get without going and double checking everybody's homework, which of course nobody does. It should be the robustness, the rigor should be in that process that is designed by the people that know it. And then you would ideally present that to your board and say, and tell them that story. This is how I know that the gas safety check is correct. We have qualified gas safety engineers going in. They record it. This is how they record it. It's captured in a system and then you would have, somebody from the tech side of things explaining why that system's secure, what validation rules happen behind the scenes. And all the way through to the AI spitting out the answer, is this property compliant? How that then all joins up and is essentially one line of integral data. To do that, you do need to work with people that understand the process, understand not just the technology, not just the systems, not just the data, but also the operation. And this is something I do with my colleagues at DataClan. I work with data specialists, I work with systems architects, and between us, we complement, because I can say, well, operationally, yeah, you've got the data coming along that that process, but have you thought about the process over here where inadvertently you've got your compliance team managing, let's stick with the gas check on the boiler, and your gas safety check over there. But what happens when the emergency repairs team come in and have to rip that boiler out because it's gone kaput over the Easter holiday? What happens then to the gas safety and the commissioning certificate then? Have we joined that process back up so that it ensures that that is updated in the system? A software, a systems architect might not know that. They probably do if they've worked in housing and property, but it's about ensuring that all the processes that touch on the data are joined up.
So what happens? There's a positive still. If we've got the right board in place, they're going to interrogate these figures and they're going to make sure that the procedures are robust. And brilliant news. What happens when they get to the point and they go, I think we need a new CEO. I'm not sure what we're getting is correct here. We need a new one. What's the process look like to bringing in a new CEO, and what's the sort of time span? And to go back to a point you made earlier, I did some research about it, and I think in the private sector, CEOs are in place between 3 and 5 years. And in the housing association world, it's 6 to 9. Don't hold me to that because it was something a long time ago, but it was something like that. So we want to replace our CEO. What do we need to do? How problematic is it? What are the challenges? How long is it going to take?
Well, it depends. The board need to decide on what they're looking for in a CEO, um, what the business needs are, where are the risks, what are the strategic priorities, um, and therefore that will help determine that candidate profile. Um, if you have, big challenges and all your indicators are suggesting that, you're going to need somebody who is a seasoned CEO who has track record in fixing, stabilizing, and um, taking organizations from that sort of firefighting state into stability and improving that performance. Um, so you would look for that. I mean, what are your options? Most will go out to the recruitment markets. They will appoint a recruiter who will run that search and have probably conversations with headhunts and see. I guess there will also be there might be talks already between, where organizations might be thinking about merging, and so therefore you inherit and which CEO stays. And
The
I guess
dominant CEO, there's
the
the phrase.
dominant, yeah, and it's, merging two organizations comes with huge risk, as I know you've pointed out in your blogs and podcasts. But you really need someone that can sort of set that foundation correctly, so that when merging, I think of it a bit like when you buy portfolios of property. That's the opportunity, as you're bringing in a new portfolio of property in. That's the time to get everything straight and orderly, and and transition it into your ways of working, your systems, your processes, to ensure things don't derail. But I suspect, to do that for a housing association, how varied they work, doesn't, in the time that in the process of doing that merger, they do it as a secondary event, whereas I think the opportunity should be during that, before you complete that um, transaction.
The due
Before,
diligence to make sure the foundations are strong in place rather than feet of clay, as which we've had all along. And
yes,
and so many problems. I think this is the problem with housing associations when they merge. So many of these problems are just buried that no one knows they exist. And that's the problem. We need to take stock. How do you feel about one last question, because we're coming out of time here. Um, when we often hear about the celebrations. Oh, we've done this, we've done that, aren't we great? And I said that lived experience doesn't hold true. It feels to me like they're sort of drowning, and rather than screaming out for help, they're telling us how nice the water is. Do we think we're at a point now where housing associations need to come out and go, yeah, we've dropped the ball here, or we've got some issues here, and we need to slow down repairs, and this is going to impact us here, or we've got a recruitment problem here, but we're doing the best we can? And do you think that would be greeted better by the residents and tenants like myself?
I think so, Ben. I don't know how, and it doesn't just happen in housing associations. It happens in other sectors. Even as consumers, I use my home as an example. I bought a new build, and my developer tells me that the door sill is compliant when I've got a building surveyor telling me it's not compliant, and they will swear that pink is green, and it happens. And actually, all you want is somebody just to acknowledge and not to play silly games. And I think that frustration and that um, distrust just builds, where you're right, as a consumer, what you experience, what you receive, what you feel just does not marry up with the outward statements. Um, and I think there's a real opportunity to, somebody needs to rip the plaster off and be honest. And to be honest, you have got to be transparent with where the issues are. And I've found that in my experience, and I've had to deal with residents with building safety issues, with service charges skyrocketing, and I think we spoke about this last time, perhaps where there's tricky issues, you have to face into them, and you have to show people what you're doing and show them that you have a plan. And if you don't have a plan because something's just happened, you need to tell them what you're doing to develop that plan. And it is all about information communication. And I think until people are prepared to sort of be more open about what they know, what they don't, the known, the unknown, unknowns, all of that. It's fine to have unknowns. You can be in the middle of a build, it's iterative, isn't it? Sometimes you find information out that then changes your course of action. As long as you're saying at this point in time, we knew this, and at this point, and this is what we're doing. Now, of course, there will be judgment after the event. And if you could have got somewhere quicker, yeah, you'll be pulled up on that. But if you're honest and if you talk to people along the way and allow them to hold you to account, I had a group of residents, and they were very rightly cross because they didn't feel that they had been told what was going on. They were in the dark. They were experiencing, you know, big significant issues, and they were worried. Of course they were worried. It's their home. Who wouldn't be? And we worked with them, weekly, almost bi-weekly meetings, just saying, this is what we're doing. And that, they gradually, you know, began to trust that we were doing all we could. It was an impossible situation. But I think that's the only way. But to do that requires resources and, project management. It's essentially, you have somebody that has to have that knowledge of the project that can keep everybody aligned and lead the team and direct the team and make sure that people are doing what they need to. And when they can't, give them the right resources. And if you multiply that across housing, so are confronted with big issues, building safety, etc., and rising costs. You've got the new competency conduct standards, which is putting pressure. But I do think there are solutions which are not, a bit outside the box. And I have, I do think there's an opportunity. Certainly, I've seen through recruitment processes I've run an interest in the social housing sector from the private sector. You've got property managers who are fed up of working for the big corporate conglomerates that are just, serving their private equity owners. They want to go and do something that is worthwhile and rewarding. And actually, housing associations can offer that in spades, and they could very quickly bring in that competence. But I think there might be a little bit of resistance to that from, it's seen as the private sector coming into the public, and there is a bit of a cultural issue there and a gap.
Private sector have had to be accountable to their shareholders, so they've had to get it right, which I think is the problem with the not-for-profits. It's a nice way of hiding, oh, we're not-for-profit, we're doing our best, and we want everyone to have nice homes, but it's difficult. Well, if you can't do it, get out the bloody way. Okay, look, I think we've covered quite a lot there. I've ticked off lots as we went. Thank you very much indeed, Hannah. Let's hope, and there's lots of changes afoot with my own landlord. I will be doing, I was going to do one big podcast and it's become too long. So there will be over the week or so, sort of shorter videos about the process as we go through, because I suspect we're up front for another merger, another rebranding. and new leadership, and it's already started. So stay tuned for that. Hannah, thank you very much indeed for your time. It's always great to have you on. Your input and insight is lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Enjoy the rest of
Cheers,
your
Ben.
weekend. And to everyone else who's at home, thank you very much indeed. And if you can like and subscribe, it would be lovely. We're at almost 300 subscribers on the YouTube channel, which is small fish, but when we get to 500, I might start making some money from all of this effort. God bless you all. Thank you very much. Thanks, Hannah.
Cheers, Ben.